Hello and welcome back to the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse. If you've been keeping up with us on social media, you know that we're not only back here, online, but in person, opening up the 17th installment of the East Village Chronicles, East Side Stories, Actually. We had 4 great shows this weekend, and before our last 4 shows this Thursday through Sunday, the playwrights and director are here to tell us a bit about the process. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what brought them to this project and this neighborhood.
My name's Tom Lavagnino, and I have been a playwright now for about 20 years after a sort of checkered career as a screenwriter and television writer. And I'm living in Los Angeles. I've been in Los Angeles for decades, although I am an NYU graduate, and I miss New York every day. I love living in the city. Never needed more than 6 hours sleep when I lived in New York. I need 8 hours here, so I'm losing 2 hours a day. It's not good. Not a good thing going forward. But yeah, I've been basically focused on playwriting pretty much exclusively for, like I say, about 20 years. And the prospect of having my little play, part of this East Side Stories, is fantastic, because I think that my piece is very germane to the area, and I've always loved the Lower East Side. I mean, when I lived in Manhattan, the Lower East Side was kind of a dodgy place, but I loved it, and I always had a great time. And it's just great to be a part of this particular production that's being done by Metropolitan Playhouse. So it's just great to be here.
The East Village has been a dodgy place. I moved in 1981. My rent was $48 a month because nobody lived here. My husband and I, well, we could barely pay the rent. You're making $4 or $5 an hour. But we lived across from Hell's Angels, and our front neighbors were Hell's Angels. And when my husband got sick, I actually live in Village View now, where my play takes place. And he didn't like the low ceilings. In our apartment, we had these high ceilings, but we padlocked the outside of the door because we've been robbed so many times. We had it padlocked and we barred the windows. But we moved to Chinatown, and then my husband finally gave in and moved to a lower ceiling place. But I've written plays. My dad worked here for many years, and I split between writing plays about New York, New Jersey, where I was raised, and the South, to honor my husband, who died 27 years ago. So I think I've always said most of my plays, I try to my own health, my husband's health, my family's health. I make sure it informs my work instead of defines it. And I've learned to find humor, I believe, in illness and loss, and that's kind of what gets me writing. Metropolitan is half block from me. Alex has seen some work that I've actually produced, and I'm so happy to finally participate.
Yes, I'm Christian Missonak. I'm the writer of Cooperative, which is one of the plays in the festival, obviously. Yeah, I'm not from New York originally. I only moved here 2 years ago, so I'm a bit of a carpetbagger in writing about the Lower East Side, which has not looked all that different from other places in downtown New York in the time that I've lived here. But I am very much inspired by its history. And so it was really gratifying to be able to write a little bit about my new adopted home. I'm from Chicago originally. Yeah, so I'm just really excited to be here and excited to participate.
I'm Rachael Langton. I'm the director of East Side Stories, actually. And it has just been such a pleasure to put these 5 stories together and work with each of these playwrights and then a production team and a wonderful cast to get these shows ready.
Hi, I'm Jonathon Ward, coming from Valley Stream, New York, which is down by JFK Airport. I have written really since college when I did a musical adaptation of Kafka's America. And but to earn a living, I didn't want to go into TV writing or commercial writing. I have always written sort of on the side and done a lot of arts administrative things. First in television, I did a lot of television producing and community television. I've always been involved in community arts. And then when I came to New York, I started working with Henry Street Settlement Abrams Art Center on the Lower East Side, and was there for about 20 years, producing, writing, starting theater groups, supporting lots and lots of theater groups. So I've always been in Lower Manhattan artistically and involved in the communities and absolutely loved it. And so it's only natural that when I'm not producing or sometimes I self-produce, but I write now, and naturally I write of a beautiful place, the Lower East Side.
Hi, I'm Natalina Lopez, and I wrote additional information regarding the odd incident that occurred in the first L station on Tuesday night. Sorry for that title, everyone. I am a student in New York City. I'm concentrating in dramaturgy. So this will be actually my first play that's being produced in New York. And I'm so excited and so lovely to meet all of you and to work with Rachael as well on this. The history, I think, of the East Village was always attractive to me since I've been living in New York. I think it's really cool because it has this like history of being a hotbed for music. And so I wanted to include that in my play somehow. And especially like the notion of underground music, because my play takes place literally underground. And then I've always been like interested in changing neighborhoods, especially like gentrification. I'm from a suburb of Los Angeles, but my dad grew up in Los Angeles, and like where he grew up is now a totally different area with like mansions. So it's just like fascinating to look at that in a smaller like local level, like the East Village. And again, I wanted to explore what that means for like people not only living in that area, but working there, and how they inspire like future generations going forward.
Thank you so much for that. I'm curious for all of you too, if the writing and creating of this process made you think about those things differently. If you had an idea about what these neighborhoods were before you started writing, if you've had any thoughts since after they've kind of been on their feet a little bit, if you've heard them in the Zoom room or live and in person.
I'll say for me, rather than, it wasn't so in creating this play, it wasn't so much that I was inspired, that I wanted to write something about the Lower East Side and then came up with the kind of the story to have take place there. I was inspired by a podcast that I had listened to specifically about the circumstances that I discuss in my play, which is about a collection of squatters in various buildings in the early 2000s were able to take possession of those buildings legally. And, that process of going from kind of this, anarchist kind of like taking charge of their own destinies and then becoming part of the, the general, gears that grind within our city. So that story was very inspiring. These people, growing from, youthful renegades to these middle-aged, landlords and homeowners, and that kind of jockeying for, staying true to your ideals and, also making these allowances to, build a better life for yourselves and, for your children. So I was inspired by that very specific circumstance, and so wanted to write specifically about it, and kind of have a focus on kind of a couple that each one kind of espouses different philosophies about it. So my first kind of introduction, I mean, I was aware, I had first listened to that podcast before I moved to New York. I moved to New York during the pandemic, which I don't recommend as a time to do that. So my first kind of introduction to the notion of the Lower East Side as being this kind of extant place from a lot of the other neighborhoods around it, in this pre-gentrified notion of it. I never had that. I've never known that Lower East Side. This was my introduction to it. And that really kind of drew me to the area, which is so much more different than a lot of the places that surround it otherwise in downtown. So yeah, I kind of came at it probably differently than those who, have lived and breathed the Lower East Side their whole lives, and then are telling a story that takes place in this place that they know. I've never lived in the Lower East Side, even living in New York. I live in Astoria, so I'm not all that close to it. But so it's definitely been, it's been cool to, I wrote about it before I ever went there. So it's cool to now actually, be going to a theater where this is taking place and kind of exploring this part of the city that I haven't had an opportunity to explore too much yet.
Well, what's drawn me to the Lower East Side, engaged me forever, is there's the radicalness of thinkers and artists who have come out of communities that are more traditional communities, whether it's the Jewish, Latino, or the African American, or the Chinese communities. They can be, that are strong communities, somewhat conservative, but at the same time, there's this overlay of people from those groups that are politically radical in wonderful ways, and artists who have really taken control of part of the city that was abandoned by others. I remember like the Clemente Soto Art Center, and the fight and the battles and knowing the artistic community that lived there and worked there was just wonderful things that had happened. And that's changed with gentrification, but there are things that still link that past to the present, and are vital to be remembered and explored. They're so important.
Yeah, I think my motivation with my play, and it's it's interesting to look at the synopses of the other 4 plays, which have a lot of gravitas, unlike I think my play, which is sort of I think appropriately designed to be kind of the running gag of the evening of theater. But I think there is the germ of like a serious idea in my play, which is that, and I think it kind of goes to what other people are talking about, the gentrification, that kind of thing. But my play is actually set at Venus Records, which was a mainstay of music lovers back in the day. It was run by a very good friend of mine named Bill Shore, who started the operation out of his apartment when he was living on St. Mark's Place, dealing mostly at the time this is pre-CDs, by the way, just vinyl, selling mostly import vinyl from UK and Europe, selling independent 45s from bands in New York and elsewhere, operating out of his apartment. He got so successful that he started an actual retail store, originally located on the other end of 8th Street at 6th Avenue, right across the street from Electric Ladyland Studios, actually. That was a small sort of retail place, but that clicked. And he then moved to the other end at St. Mark's Place at about 100 feet to the west of 2nd Avenue. And that's kind of the place where the play is set, of course. And it's, I guess my play, I would characterize it as kind of a historical document, sort of showcasing, this one snapshot of history, really. I mean, I'm from a time when I remember the Kiev Diner on Second Avenue. I remember going to the Orchidea restaurant, which was a great Ukrainian Italian restaurant at the corner of 9th Street and Second Avenue. I think it's now a Starbucks. So, this play, I think one of the motivations is to kind of chronicle this somewhat forgotten bit of history and dramatize it with some laughs.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the contrast between Waiting for My Man, Tom's play, and the other four. And we definitely did set it up to be kind of the running gag of the evening, that
Right.
we always come back to this line that we're waiting for. But I think one of the things that really drew me to these 5 plays in particular is that they all have these themes of authenticity. And what does it mean to be authentic in the East Village, which I think is something that the East Village has been questioning for ages. What does it mean to be for a cause in the idealistic, theoretical way versus in actuality? And I think even in Waiting for My Man, we talked a lot about, is Lou Reed the new dynamic and contemporary Lou Reed? That's like a line that is repeated many, many times. And this idea that people change, they go from good to lame. It's same in Co-op of people change, they go from taking over a building and being anarchists to real estate moguls or to homeowners. It's that question of change. In the plan, we go from, a mother and daughter who live really close to each other, if to moving on to assisted living, and they have their plan, their theoretical thing that's going to take them from A to B. But it's different when you're actually living it from A to B, and there's that. In London Love, we have a relationship changing from being in Colorado to New York, and the history of what it means to come back and re-own your family history versus what it is to actually live it. And there's contrast between these two love stories that are happening. And then same with additional information, we have the idea of this family-run flower shop business, and what does it mean to actually serve the people in an idealistic sense that Pedro, the dad, kind of has, versus Callie as a teenager, what that actually means for her in school and in her social relationships and just growing up working at a Subway flower shop. So I really just have liked in these relationships as they all kind of shift from one thing to another. In each play, there's this idea of like this highfalutin or idealistic plan or theory to get us there, and then the actual reality, and the two kind of hit in each play. So I like to see how that has happened in each story as we kind of go from one place to the other.
Yeah, that's interesting because the plan, my piece, is actually historical in that Village View, where I live, has become a natural occurring retirement community, a NORC. And I mean, across the hall, I've got 2 dead neighbors. I mean, and they caught them while they were alive. They would always yell for me for help. And my husband died here and I'm yelling for help. And, they do have more assistance because when you get middle income housing in New York, you're not going to move because the rents are right. Yeah, so people age in place here, and that creates different problems in the neighborhood as well. We have a lot of fragile people, we have shut-ins and stuff like that. And I mean, I'd rather age in place here than anywhere else, I think. There's an elevator. But yeah, so it is historical too. Although the first houses is the first lower income buildings in New York. The first, I believe originally they thought that people would live in Village View before they could afford to buy a house in New Jersey. That's in some of the literature. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious then too. Thank you, Rachel, for talking about the authenticity and this idea of actually of our theme for the evening. I'm curious if you also, playwrights beyond the neighborhood, if you had that kind of thought while writing, and either way, what kind of themes you would assign to your piece and how it fits into the grand scheme of the evening.
Lenin in Love. I mean, I actually before COVID, it. I had written it for the Metropolitan Playhouse, and I think the theme was revolution, and and that was I always forget the actual election years, but Bernie Sanders was very much in the forefront and of interest to me because of my background and my sons, and that was this resurgence of an idea that has is much more woven into American politics than people think, and having lived and worked in, or not lived in, but worked on the Lower East Side, I always knew about the Lenin statue, which always fascinated me, and where it came from, why it's there, why it seems appropriate, why it sort of lords over the neighborhood in this wonderful way. And, thinking about Bernie Sanders and, that how these ideas come back, really fascinated me, which is like with the authenticity. People do find that there's a groundedness in certain kinds of leftist socialist thinking. And that doesn't go away as an idea, and how it comes back into the contemporary setting where we've been through this incredible period of, capitalist expansion, money is everything, real estate, everything, become the most important thing to so many people. But yet there's this idea that's still knocking at the door. I was born in New York City. I grew up outside of the city. I came back to the city. I left the city. I came back to the city. And I think people do that. And it's always, when you put your foot back in the water of coming into New York, is like, oh, what have I done here? Can I go forward with this? And then you do. And then time goes by and you love it. And, it's, so anyway, that's where this finding the authentic place where you belong is, to me, essential. And on the Lower East Side, my God, that's what everyone thinks.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that in rehearsal, especially when Eugenia, the character that moves to New York, she's loving her penthouse apartment that her grandmother left her. And then Matt, who is originally from Texas and has lived in Colorado, keeps complaining of like, there's not much of a view, it's really small. And it's just funny being in a room with like New York actors and New York stage managers. All of us are living in teeny tiny apartments, but like we wouldn't trade it for the world, because this is where we're meant to be and what we love to do. And it's just very funny when you talk to people who don't like living in New York, and they do ask those questions like, but like, you could have a full house, why are you paying $1,000 to $2,000 a month to live in a shoebox? And I'm like, but why are you paying less to live anywhere else? Like, it's a very funny New York thing.
We probably already hit it, but yeah, it's this notion of an area. I mean, because while I wasn't super familiar with the Lower East Side, I saw a lot of gentrification within Chicago as well. It's happening everywhere. And there is this, it's amazing, this kind of battle that, even I would feel myself in these kind of places where it's like, the dual, concepts of like wanting to keep these places, to keep the soul of these places intact, to keep what's special about these places special, but while also recognizing that like, oh, well, it's good that this thing that was in disrepair is now fixed, and it's good that the area is safer. And, those things are at war with each other, and yet there is virtue in both concepts, but they can't both exist. So it's this delicate needle that you have to thread, and ultimately something's going to get lost. And ultimately, I mean, the writing's on the wall that kind of gentrification sort of can't be stopped, no matter if we want it to or not.
The other thing that's interesting about it, and this didn't really occur to me while I was writing it, but I realized looking at it, you know, we now live in 2022 where the internet is ubiquitous, obviously, and has all the answers, of course. You can Google anything. There was, back in the day, back at the time of Venus Records on St. Mark's Place, there was an institutional knowledge that people had about music and records in particular, that is now knowledge that is kind of not, it doesn't have the impact it does on society as it once did. These people who worked at record stores back in the day really were the only people who had answers to some of these questions that you might have had about popular music and even the culture in general, larger questions about the culture. So it's a little bit sad that that's gone. And I think that perspective is certainly personified by the one character in my play. And I think there's a poignancy to that hopefully comes through with the production. I'm sure it does. And yeah, I think that from a thematic standpoint, that's something that the play has going for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we've covered a lot, but on the note of authenticity, I personally had like this little obsession with small family-run businesses and like how they become such integral parts of neighborhoods, like how they're impacted by the people, how they impact the people there. And that's like, I think like there are a lot of small businesses in the East Village. And there's just something so beautiful and authentic about that. And I was like, especially curious what it would be like to have a parent or a family member like have one of those, but like in the subway, because whenever I pass those places, I'm just very curious like what it's like with all the different like influx of people through the transportation there. So I hope I'm doing that justice. But then thematically, there are like a lot of different layers to my play. I think it's a little bit of like a coming of age play, and specifically focuses on how dreams are passed down from generation to generation and how a particular neighborhood informs those dreams and like the people growing up there.
Once the idea of authenticity kind of came to place, and seeing, well, I started then reading all the plays and they just all felt very heavy. So I was like, well, I think we just need to give a breath in between to just help us get through. And when I say heavy, it's not like these plays are complete tragedies. They all have a lot of comedic moments and breath within themselves. But I didn't want it to, I wanted to make sure that we had some fun to help us get from one place to the other. And that's where the idea of breaking up this Waiting for My Man kind of came from, of it being our one really comedic piece. When I was talking with our designers about the space and about transitions in the night as a whole, one thing that we talked a lot about was I really liked the idea that we're just kind of zooming into one story for a little while and visiting that, and then we're zooming back out to the whole collective, and then we're zooming back into another story. So set-wise, the way that this had happened was we started looking at all the murals that are around the East Village right now. And it's really fun to just take a mural tour of the East Village. There's some really beautiful artwork out there. And they're also, a lot of them are modern, but there's some that are a bit older. And one of the things I really love about murals is that you have so many ideas happening, and sometimes it almost looks like 3 different artists went at it, and it kind of creates this beautiful picture as a whole. But then if you look at one small part, you'll find a detail that will stick out. And that's kind of how I saw these plays, of like, we have all these artists coming together, creating a big whole image of what is the East Village. But let's pinpoint these little moments right there.
It does feel very Lower East Side because of that. waiting in line on the Lower East Side, that I understand. And but then, and then going into an apartment, and all of them are different, that's really nice.
I just want to say that it's one of the great tragedies of my life that I'm not going to be there to see the show. I have a feeling, I have the distinct instinct that it's going to be a smashing success, though. And I think it's going to be fantastic. And it's really an honor to be a part of this consortium of playwrights, particularly given the focus on the Lower East Side, a beloved neighborhood for me. I've got a lot of great memories there, and I wish I was there. I wish I was there with y'all. That's all I can say.
I'm really excited to see what happens when you add an audience to this piece. So I'm very excited for tonight, and I want to thank all of you for bringing your pieces to Metropolitan, and Metropolitan for all the work producing this. It's just been really artistically fulfilling and a joyful process, and I can't wait for people to see it.
We hope you, virtual audience, will be among those people, and do get your tickets soon because they are selling quickly, and stay tuned for our summer and fall plans. I'd like to thank all the artists for joining us today, and thank all of you for being here to chat about our show and our community. We'll look forward to seeing you in our East Village home. In the meantime, and as always, be well, stay safe, and continue to love one another.